Hello, everybody. This is Frank with Iron Age News, South Florida Conservative News Center, Wednesday, March 4th, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And there's a number of issues that will need to be addressed in the next couple of days. One of which, of course, is the fact that the international media, I wouldn't say they lie, but they do not really explain the situation in Iran as far as how the military and the government are set up. When you see that the Israelis were able to tell America where to blow up an entire group of clerics that were voting to put in the new fake cleric, you would think the times are changing and they would surrender soon. But that is not how the Iranian government has situated itself. And we will have the same problem if you ever decide to tangle with the Chinese, and a little bit to the same with the Russians, but not so much. But we'll say China for sure. And that gives you the tagline, which is "We surrender, but yet fight on." So today we're going to talk about exactly that. If you listen to most news coverage, you'll hear the phrase the Iranian military, either the Iranian army or right now they're sinking the Iranian navy, right? Sank a couple of their ships, used as if it were one single institution, but that's not exactly how Iran is organized. In reality, Iran operates two separate military systems. One is the conventional national army and navy, etc. The other is an ideological revolutionary force designed specifically to protect the regime, and that came out of the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Understanding the distinction is essential if you want to understand how Iran fights wars, how the regime is going to survive as it has this crisis, and why the country could theoretically find itself in a situation where one military stops fighting while the other continues. So here's the basics. The Iranian armed forces are divided into two main institutions. The first is the Artesh, which is the conventional armed forces of Iran. This is the traditional army as you see it in the Western world. It's the army, the air force, the navy, air defense, et cetera, et cetera. In many ways, it is, like I said, the same as the military structure of most modern states. Its primary mission is simple: to defend Iran's territory and sovereignty. Okay. But after the 1979 revolution, the new revolutionary leadership didn't fully trust this traditional military, probably because of how it got into power. Many officers had served under the Shah, and the clerical leadership feared that a professional army might someday attempt to overthrow the new regime. So the revolution created something else: the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, which is what we call the IRGC. This organization was not simply another branch of the armed service, it was created to protect the revolution itself. It is an entirely organic operation unto itself. That is basically who you are fighting right now. Over time, the IRGC developed its own ground forces, its own naval units, the missile command, the intelligence networks, and even its own expeditionary arm, which operates outside of Iran. When you hear about, like in Colombia, where they arrested a guy from the Quds Force who was trying to arrange assassination of Jews, that's them. All right. Today, the IRGC is not just a military force, it is one of the most powerful institutions in Iran's political and economic system and a major player in criminal terrorism worldwide. So, this kind of system isn't unique to Iran, though. Political scientists call it coup proofing. Revolutionary regimes often fear that their own military could eventually overthrow them. Where would they get that idea, right? So they create parallel forces whose loyalty is tied directly to the ruling ideology. Those of you who have seen the pro regime people in Tehran with that big parade and all that, there you go, right? And a good example of this that is still out there is the government of Communist China. The People's Liberation Army is not technically the national army of the Chinese state. It is the armed wing of the Chinese Communist Party. The principle guiding the system is simple: the party controls the gun, right? If I have the gun, I stay in power. Iran's revolutionary leadership adopted a similar structure. The conventional army defends the country, the Revolutionary Guard protects the revolution. So you have two militaries, two separate missions, two distinctly different institutional loyalties. And that's where the problem is with media coverage right now. Not that they don't know, but they decide not to let the regular viewer become aware of this. Most reporting simply refers to Iranian forces as if everything operates under a single chain of command, or when they refer to IRGC, they talk about terrorism, which they are terrorist operators, but that is not their exclusive job either. So that's not giving you the real picture. By ignoring the distinction between the National Military and Revolutionary Guard, the journalists end up obscuring how power actually works inside of Iran. And that leads to another serious problem. It produces a distorted picture of Iran's resilience in wartime, which is what you're getting right now. If observers assume that Iran's military is one unified institution, they might interpret attacks on IRGC infrastructure as weakening the entire country's military capacity, or vice versa. We're sinking this big surface fleet, but that doesn't really affect the IRGC. The reality is more complicated. So you're damaging the regime's ideological security forces does not necessarily collapse Iran's conventional military, and weakening conventional military units does not actually destroy the regime's revolutionary power structure. In other words, failing to distinguish between these institutions can lead analysts to confuse the durability of the regime, which is the IRGC people, with the resilience of the nation, which is everybody that's not a flaming Islamo-fascist. So now here's where this dual structure is exceedingly interesting from a strategic point of view, because these two institutions exist for different reasons. They could theoretically react differently in a major crisis similar to this. The conventional army exists to defend the state and protect the population. Once again, the Revolutionary Guard exists to defend the revolutionary system. Once again, we always just so we continue to tell you so you remember this. If those priorities ever diverge under extreme pressure, like a combined missile and aerial bombardment campaign, as it does now, the results can be unpredictable. Unpredictable. It is entirely possible, in theory, but I would say it's entirely possible from historic examples that one institution could decide that continued war threatens the survival of the nation, while the other could conclude that the revolutionary regime must fight on at all costs. And that's not really a prediction, it's kind of how they operate. But the structure of the Iranian system makes that possibility a very real thing. So, in closing, Iran's military structure reflects the political logic of the Islamic Republic. You got one institution protects the country, the other protects the revolution. Together, they form a system designed not just to fight wars, but to ensure the survival of the regime that emerged from the upheaval of 1979. And that brings us back to the strange paradox, as we say, this system creates. In most extreme circumstances, Iran's military architecture raises a possibility that very few analysts, especially those on CNN and Fox, even discuss openly. You have a situation where the national military might step back from the conflict while the revolutionary forces that guard the regime continue to fight, which brings us back to that we surrender and fight on hypothesis that we have. So thanks for listening. Like, subscribe, yeah. We are on YouTube, Rumble, BitChute, Substack, and our own page where we have written documentation, which is usually more detailed, at www.southfloridaconservative.com. And it's free. We don't charge for things. It's free. So there you have it. It's Wednesday. Have a great day. And we will be back today or tomorrow. Who knows? It's crazy news.